Imagine taking an ancient philosophical mind, a mind forged in a world of myths, gods, and epic poets, and then just dropping it, without warning, into a cutting-edge contemporary debate about the very nature of reality itself. What kind of intellectual sparks would fly? What deeply held assumptions, maybe on both sides, would suddenly be exposed?
That's a fascinating thought experiment.
Welcome to AI History of Western Philosophy. Today, we're not just discussing philosophy, we're orchestrating, well, a truly unique conceptual experiment, a profound dialogue across 2.5 millennia. We're bringing together two remarkable thinkers, separated by vast stretches of time, different cultures, to grapple with a question as ancient as human consciousness itself. How do we truly understand reality? And what do we really mean when we talk about the human?
It's a fundamental question, isn't it? And one that takes radically different forms depending on who you ask and when.
Exactly. For this journey, we have two formidable minds ready to guide us. On one side, we'll dive into the work of Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, a leading Brazilian anthropologist. His groundbreaking theories on Amerindian perspectivism and multinaturalism have quite literally reconfigured how we understand the relationship between reality and culture.
Yeah, his work has been incredibly influential.
He's famous for envisioning anthropology not just as a study, but as the practice of the permanent decolonization of thought. It's a powerful phrase, and as we'll explore, it perfectly captures the transformative and sometimes unsettling power of his ideas.
And stepping into our intellectual arena from the 6th century BCE, we bring in Xenophanes of Colophon. He was an itinerant poet and really a pioneering rationalist philosopher, truly a trailblazer of his time. Xenophanes launched some of the earliest and most profound critiques of traditional Greek religion, relentlessly pursuing a singular transcendent truth that soared far, far above any human-made notions or, mythological narratives.
The real proto-philosopher.
Absolutely. His insights, born from keen observation and rigorous reason, really set him apart as a foundational figure in early Western thought.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because there's this captivating paradox right at the heart of our discussion today. Both Xenophanes and Viveiros de Castro, despite being separated by millennia, actually begin their intellectual journeys from a strikingly similar critical starting point. They both take aim at a very specific kind of human tendency. The error of universalizing one's own form, one's own perspective onto others. They both spot this fundamental human inclination to project.
That's a crucial observation. It's quite surprising, actually, that shared ground. But from this shared critical ground, they then diverge dramatically, arriving at, well, diametrically opposed conclusions. Think about Xenophanes. He uses his critique of projection as a rigorous tool for what he calls purification.
Purification.
Yeah, he wants to strip away everything that is contingent, everything that is relative, everything that is purely human, to approach a single, unified, and utterly non-perspectival divine reality. A reality that, in his words, is not at all like mortals in body or in thought. For Xenophanes, projection is fundamentally an error to be overcome, a veil to be lifted so we can reveal a higher absolute truth.
Okay, so critique leads to transcendence for him.
Exactly.
And then you have Viveiros de Castro. His analysis of Amerindian cosmologies leads him to describe a universe where a generalized human perspective is the default condition for all beings. We're talking jaguars, spirits, plants, every entity you can imagine.
Right, the complete opposite approach in a way.
Here, this kind of projection, or the projection of a subjective human-like interiority, isn't an error to be corrected. It's actually the universal constant. And when this shared subjective condition combines with a fundamental multiplicity of different bodies, it generates an irreducible plurality of worlds or natures.
So projection becomes the engine of reality, not the obstacle to it.
Precisely. For Viveiros de Castro, this very act of projection is the foundational mechanism of a truly multi-perspectival reality.
So our mission here in this particular conversation for AI History of Western Philosophy is to take Xenophanes' powerful critique of anthropomorphism and use it as a kind of philosophical probe to examine Viveiros de Castro's ideas. We're going to ask a truly provocative question. Is Viveiros de Castro's widely celebrated anti-anthropocentrism, in a strange twist of intellectual fate, actually the most profound form of anthropomorphism imaginable?
It's quite a thought, isn't it? Can you truly escape the human even when trying to decenter it? We'll dive deep into each thinker's system, laying out their core ideas, then we'll stage their direct confrontation, pitting their frameworks against each other.
And see what shakes out.
Finally, we'll assess the far-reaching implications of this clash for our understanding of humanity itself and the very nature of truth. Let's begin to unpack this incredible intellectual puzzle. Okay, let's start by laying the essential groundwork with Viveiros de Castro's truly revolutionary vision. Because at its core, his work fundamentally inverts what most of us in the West just take for granted about reality. Think about our familiar Western framework, which he calls multiculturalism built upon a mononaturalist base.
Right. That's our default setting.
This is our standard model of how the world works, and it's deeply ingrained in our thinking. It posits a single, objective, and universal nature. A world of matter and energy governed by immutable physical laws, existing completely independently of any observer. It's the physical reality that we all assume we share.
And upon this single objective nature, as you described, are arrayed a multiplicity of particular cultures. These are our diverse systems of belief, our different representations, our unique languages, and our varying worldviews. We see them as all different ways that we, as humans, interpret or make sense of this one shared world.
Different lenses on the same landscape.
Exactly. In this Western schema, the difference is located in the mind or spirit, what we categorize as culture, while the unity is located in the material, physical world, what we call nature. So in essence, it's one world, but with many different viewpoints on it. Our cultural differences are in our heads, so to speak, but the world itself is universal and singular.
That makes perfect sense. It's our default setting. Like, we all look at the same mountain, right? But some cultures might revere it as a sacred deity, while others see it purely as a geological formation, or maybe even a recreational challenge to be conquered. But the mountain itself remains the mountain, a singular, objective thing.
Mm-hmm. Pretty standard stuff for us.
But Viveiros de Castro, drawing on his extensive ethnographic research among Amazonian peoples, argues that Amerindian cosmologies operate on precisely the opposite set of assumptions. He terms this alternative framework multinaturalism.
And this is where it starts to get really interesting. What's truly fascinating here is that in this inverted Amerindian model, the universal constant is not a singular nature, but a singular culture, or you could say a universal spirit. There's a shared subjective condition, a generic humanity that actually constitutes the common ground for all beings.
All beings. We mean animals, too.
Thanks. And when I say all beings, I truly mean it. Not just what Westerners classify as humans, but also animals, spirits, plants, even certain inanimate entities. This humanity isn't a biological category tied specifically to Homo sapiens. Instead, it's a fundamental subjective stance, a reflexive pronominal condition. It's the position of the subject, the point of view from which any being perceives itself, as an I.
So like a jaguar sees itself as human.
Exactly. In this cosmology, a jaguar perceives itself as a human, as a person in its own world, just as a tapir perceives itself as a human from its own vantage point. It's the default subjective state.
Wow. Okay, so if this shared soul or spirit, this human condition, is universal, then where does all the incredible diversity of life, all these different species and forms, come from in this model? What's the source of difference, if not the spirit?
That's the twist. If the soul spirit is universal, then difference must be located elsewhere. And in multinaturalism, it resides in the body, in nature. The cosmos is populated by a multiplicity of particular natures instantiated as different types of bodies.
How nature becomes plural.
Precisely. Each body, whether it's a human body, a jaguar's body, a peccary's body, or a spirit's body, is seen as a distinct configuration of effects and capacities that actually generates its own world, its own nature. So the Amerindian model posits one universal viewpoint, that shared subjective human condition, but then many particular worlds, which are the objective realities generated by these different kinds of bodies. It's a profound reversal of our Western assumptions.
A complete flip. And this theoretical framework, as you mentioned, is deeply rooted in Amerindian mythology. Can you tell us a bit more about how their stories ground this idea of a universal humanity that then diversified?
Certainly. Their myths frequently describe a primordial pre-cosmological time, a kind of state, you could say, where all beings shared this generic human condition and could communicate freely with one another without the barriers of species. Think of it as a time before difference set in.
Like a state of original unity.
Exactly. Then some disruptive event occurred, often linked to a transgression or maybe a change in diet, which caused this original undifferentiated unity to shatter. The various types of humans were transformed, permanently adopting the animal, plant, or spirit bodies they possess today. These bodies, in essence, became their clothing or skins that now conceal their inner human form.
So it's like a primal unity that then fractured into all the different forms we see. But the core human identity remains, simply hidden beneath the surface. And this separation isn't absolute, right? Because Practices like shamanism or maybe the experiences of hunting can reveal that this underlying human condition was never truly overcome.
Precisely. That's a key element. Non-human beings can still reveal an inner human form, a soul or a double, which is concealed by their external non-human appearance. It's often conceived of as simply a skin or clothing that can be shed or seen through under certain circumstances.
Like looking past the costume to the actor inside?
Kind of, yes. This concept leads directly to the central formula of perspectivism. A single culture, many natures. It's a worldview where what we call culture is the shared universal aspect, and what we call nature is where all the radical differences truly lie. And this brings us to the paramount role of the body in Viveiros de Castro's Perspectivist ontology. In this view, the body is not just a passive biological vessel that simply contains a mind or a soul, as we often conceive it in the West. No. For Amerindians, the body is the active and generative principle of a world.
Active and generative, so it makes the world.
In a very real sense, yes. The distinction between different kinds of beings, be it human, jaguar, tapir, or spirit, isn't fundamentally a matter of cultural interpretation or some abstract spiritual essence. Rather, it is a matter of corporeal constitution. A jaguar is different from a human not simply because it looks different, but because it has a jaguar's body.
Okay.
And this body is not merely a different shape. It embodies a fundamentally different bundle of effects and capacities that defines what it can do, what it eats, how it moves, and most crucially, what it perceives.
So it's not just that the jaguar's body looks different, it experiences reality differently. And that difference is fundamentally tied to its physical being. This is a truly crucial point, then. This perspective is not just a representation of the world produced by a mind. Instead, the perspective is the world, and it is intrinsically located in the body.
Exactly. The world a being inhabits is a direct correlate of its bodily apparatus, its physical form, and its inherent capabilities. The classic ethnographic example illustrates this vividly and perhaps a bit startlingly for us. What a human perceives as blood, a jaguar perceives as manioc beer.
Right, the manioc beer example.
Well, what a human sees as a muddy water hole, a tapir perceives as a grand ceremonial house.
And these aren't just metaphors.
And this is not just different interpretations of the same objective stimulus. This is key. Instead, the different bodies, the human body, the jaguar body, the tapir body, actually produce different but equally real objective worlds. The human's blood and the jaguar's manioc beer aren't merely two homonymous terms for the exact same underlying thing. They are genuinely different things that simply occupy the same structural position within their respective body-generated worlds. For instance, they both function as a refreshing beverage.
So the reality itself, the actual substance, shifts with the body.
The reality itself, the very fabric of what is, shifts with the body, yes.
Wow, okay. That's a truly mind-bending concept for those of us steeped in Western thought. So this leads to a radical form of ontological pluralism, which is the very core of multinaturalism. Because there are many kinds of bodies, there are, in turn, many kinds of natures. Reality is not singular, it is fundamentally multiple.
It has to be in this framework.
The ethnography of hunting practices among the Yuja people, as meticulously analyzed by Tanya Stolz-Salima, provides such a powerful illustration of this concept in action. An expedition that a Yuja hunter experiences as a hunt is simultaneously experienced by the peccary prey as warfare.
Right, two different events entirely.
This isn't just a case of two different subjective viewpoints on a single event. It's the actual production of two distinct, parallel, and equally real events that are generated by the different bodily perspectives of the hunter and the hunted.
This also eliminates the profound danger for the hunter in this cosmology. If the hunter is not careful, his soul can literally be captured by the peccary's perspective. This transformation would mean his hunt becomes their war, risking the loss of his own humanity and his return to his village as a non-human.
So you can actually become the other perspective, lose yourself in it.
Precisely. The body is, therefore, the ultimate arbiter of reality, the very engine that fabricates a world around it. There is no external, neutral vantage point from which to judge these realities. Reality is always already perspectival, always embodied, and always in flux, depending on the body that inhabits it. Hashtag 1.3, the paradox of anti-anthropocentric anthropomorphism.
Yeah.
Okay, here we encounter a truly counterintuitive and paradoxical claim, one that sits right at the heart of Viveiros de Castro's project and is perhaps the most challenging for Western minds to grasp. He argues that the Amerindian cosmological practice of extending a human condition, a subjective personhood, to all beings is, in fact, a profoundly anti-anthropocentric gesture.
Wait, extending the human condition is anti-anthropocentric? How does that work? Usually we think of anthropomorphism as the peak of being human-centered.
Exactly. This stands in stark contrast to our typical Western understanding of anthropomorphism, which we almost universally see as the epitome of human-centered thinking. It's about projecting human qualities onto a fundamentally non-human world, while simultaneously maintaining the absolute superiority and distinctiveness of the human species.
So for us, when we say my dog thinks just like a human, we're often seen as elevating ourselves, projecting our own attributes. But Viveiros de Castro is saying something completely different about the Amerindian view.
He is. He suggests the anti-anthropocentric power of perspectivism derives from its radical decentering of the biological species Homo sapiens. In the Western mononaturalist framework, humanity is this special, unique condition set apart from all other creatures. But in the Amerindian multinaturalist framework, the human condition, understood as subjectivity, personhood, and the capacity to have a point of view, is actually the generic default mode of being for everything that exists.
So, because everything is human in that subjective sense, our kind of human isn't special anymore.
That's the crux of it. Animals, spirits, and plants don't need to be humanized because they are already subjects in their own right. They inherently see themselves as human, as persons. As one analysis puts it so succinctly, in a world where everything is human, being human is not that special.
Huh. That's a really interesting way to put it.
The biological species we call human is merely one particular corporeal manifestation, one nature among a multitude of others. In this scheme, the concept of humanity ceases to define a separate, privileged ontological domain and instead becomes the universe of discourse, or the universal substance from which all specific differences, all the various natures, emerge.
This sounds like a truly profound reversal of Western thought. So for us, Western science often starts with the continuity of bodies. We're all animals, made of the same matter, subject to the same physical laws, and then introduces a radical discontinuity of spirit, meaning only humans have culture or reason.
Right, that's the standard evolutionary biological view.
But Amerindian perspectivism, as you've explained, starts with a metaphysical continuity of spirit. All beings are human subjects, possessing a similar interiority, and then introduces a physical discontinuity of bodies. The result is an anthropomorphism that is simultaneously anti-anthropocentric. It uses the form of the human subject as a universal template, but in doing so, it paradoxically strips the human species, Homo sapiens, of a uniquely privileged place in the cosmos.
It really is a mind-bending inversion of our common sense. It uses the human form to decenter the human species. Now, it's crucial to understand that this isn't just a descriptive theory. Viveiros de Castro's work is animated by an explicit and deeply militant political and philosophical mission. This mission is powerfully encapsulated in his vision of anthropology as the practice of the permanent decolonization of thought.
Permanent decolonization of thought, not just politics or land.
Exactly. It's not about decolonizing societies in the conventional sense of dismantling political empires, but a far deeper demand to decolonize the very conceptual apparatus, the frameworks and categories through which we, as Westerners, apprehend and analyze the world. The primary target of this profound decolonization is the set of foundational dualisms that structure Western metaphysics, most notably the distinction between nature and culture.
So it's about shifting the fundamental lens through which we understand knowledge itself and, indeed, reality. This project, then, requires a truly fundamental shift in the anthropological stance. It insists on taking indigenous thought seriously, which means treating it not as a collection of quaint beliefs or worldviews or representations that can simply be explained away or translated into the, let's say, superior framework of Western science.
Right. It rejects that hierarchy completely.
Instead, it demands that we treat indigenous thought as a coherent and valid metaphysical system in its own right. To take the native seriously is to allow their concepts to genuinely challenge and potentially transform our own. It's to move from an anthropology that studies different cultural representations of one world to an anthropology that can truly countenance the existence of different worlds.
That's the leap.
This fundamental shift, moving from epistemology, how we know, to ontology, what exists, is what we call the ontological turn.
And for this new, transformative anthropological method, Viveiros de Castro deploys a truly evocative and, well, provocative metaphor, cannibal metaphysics. This concept draws on the historical practice of ritual cannibalism in parts of the Amazon, but it reinterprets it as a profound metaphysical operation.
Cannibal metaphysics, that sounds intense.
It is. In this view, the goal of cannibalism wasn't simply to ingest the flesh of an enemy in a literal sense, but rather to capture and incorporate their point of view, their unique relationality, their condition. The cannibal consumes the enemy's condition as enemy, thereby transforming and composing the social body by assimilating symbolic resources from the outside, rather than being defined by internal purity.
That's a powerful and indeed unsettling image, pushing us beyond our typical interpretations. So Viveiros de Castro proposes that anthropology should adopt a similar, conceptually cannibalistic method. Instead of treating the other as a friend, meaning a mirror of the self, or maybe a rival who is ultimately just like us, anthropology should treat the other as an enemy in this conceptual sense.
An enemy whose perspective you need to ingest.
It should aim to ingest the other's perspective in its radical difference, allowing that difference to fundamentally transform the anthropologist's own conceptual framework. Rather than simply categorizing it or explaining it away, it's a complete dismantling of the traditional Western gaze.
And the practical tool for this cannibalistic translation for navigating these diverging worlds is what he calls controlled equivocation. When anthropologists attempt to translate between different ontological systems, they will inevitably encounter equivocations, words that appear to be synonyms, but actually refer to radically different things because they belong to different worlds.
Like the blood and manioc beer example again.
Exactly. The goal isn't to resolve this misunderstanding by finding a single, true, common referent that both terms point to. That would just be imposing our ontology. Rather, the goal is to control the equivocation, to use it productively. The anthropologist must understand that the misunderstanding itself is actually the foundation of the relationship between the two worlds, a generative site of difference.
So the misunderstanding is the point of contact.
Precisely. By meticulously tracing how different concepts occupy the same structural slot in their respective ontologies, like refreshing beverage, the anthropologist can begin to map the divergence between worlds without reducing one to the terms of the other. This method, for Viveiros de Castro, aims for a permanent decolonization because it's a process without end. Thought is constantly at risk of being recolonized by familiar categories, and the task of opening it to the outside must be perpetually renewed.
We've just navigated Viveiros de Castro's radical inversion of reality, a universe where everything is subjectively human but manifests in different natures. But how would an ancient mind, stripped of our modern assumptions and scientific frameworks, react to such a universe? Let's turn our gaze now to Xenophanes of Colophon, our ancient sage.
Right, let's bring him into the conversation.
He was a wandering poet and thinker from the late 6th and early 5th centuries BCE, and he represents one of the earliest and most trenchant critiques of traditional religion in the entire Western tradition. His attack is grounded in a powerful epistemological insight, that the common conception of the gods is not a reflection of divine reality, but a mere projection of human nature.
He really cuts through the mythology. Xenophanes' critique unfolds through two primary lines of argument. The first is an argument from cultural relativity, which is quite ahead of its time. As an itinerant rhapsode who traveled widely across the Greek world, Xenophanes was a keen observer of human customs and beliefs.
He saw how different people pictured their gods differently.
Exactly. He couldn't help but notice that different peoples invariably depicted their gods in their own physical image. In a now famous fragment, he states, with a touch of dry wit, Ethiopians say that their gods are snub-nosed and black. Thracians that theirs are blue-eyed and red-haired.
Huh. Very specific.
For Xenophanes, this empirical observation was not a celebration of cultural diversity, as we might interpret it today. Not at all. Instead, it was clear proof of the subjective and contingent nature of these beliefs. If the form of the gods changes depending on the location and ethnicity of the believer, then it is highly improbable that any of these depictions correspond to an objective truth.
So the very fact that they disagree proves they're probably all wrong.
That's his logic. The very multiplicity and contradiction of these projections, for him, undermine the validity of each one.
That's a powerful logical leap for his era, highlighting the arbitrary nature of such beliefs. And then Xenophanes takes this idea of projection and pushes it to an almost absurd but absolutely brilliant conclusion, doesn't he? He extends this logic from cultural difference to species difference in what's perhaps his most cited passage, a satirical reductio ad absurdum.
Oh yes, the famous fragment about animals.
He speculates. But if horses or oxen or lions had hands, or could draw with their hands and accomplish such works as men, horses would draw the figures of the gods as similar to horses, and the oxen as similar to oxen, and they would make the bodies in the sort which each of them had.
It's such a brilliant image. It perfectly exposes the fundamental error of anthropomorphism. It's the uncritical privileging of one's own particular form, one's own species, as the universal model for the divine. The root error Xenophanes identifies is precisely this projection.
It's not just a mistake, it's kind of arrogant.
He targets the folly of mortals who suppose that gods are born, wear their own clothes, and have a voice and body. He diagnoses this as a profound epistemological failure, a confusion of subjective conception, what we think, with objective reality, what is. It's driven by the human propensity to create gods literally in our own image. It's not just wrong, it's a deep intellectual failing, a kind of self-deception. And Xenophanes' critique wasn't limited to the physical form of the gods. He was equally, if not more, concerned with their moral character as depicted in the foundational texts of Greek culture. He launched a direct and really quite audacious attack on the authority of the great epic poets, Homer and Hesiod.
Attacking Homer and Hesiod, that was like attacking the Bible back then.
Pretty much, yes. Their works were practically sacred texts. He attacked them for their portrayals of the divine. In a pointed fragment, he laments that Homer and Hesiod have attributed to the gods all sorts of things which are matters of reproach and censure among men: theft, adultery, and mutual deceit.
All the juicy stuff from the myths.
Exactly. But Xenophanes found it both absurd and impious that the very beings held up for worship should engage in behavior that even ordinary mortals would recognize as shameful and immoral.
So he's basically saying, if you wouldn't do it, why would your goddads? Implicit in this moral critique is a powerful, very early rationalist principle of theology. The divine, by its very nature, must be morally perfect.
That's the standard he holds them to.
Xenophanes was among the first thinkers in the West to insist that religious conceptions must adhere to standards of rationality and moral consistency. For him, a perfect being simply could not be subject to the petty jealousies, the deceptions, and the conflicts that characterize the Olympian pantheon.
It just didn't compute, rationally or ethically.
Attributing such flaws to the gods was not only an intellectual error, but, in his view, an act of impiety, a failure to show proper reverence to what is truly divine.
His aim, then, wasn't to abolish religion outright, but to radically reform it. He sought to purify it of its mythological and anthropomorphic accretions, and to align it instead with a more rational and ethically elevated understanding of the divine.
Philosophical purification.
Absolutely. This move marked a truly significant break with the poetic mythological tradition that had dominated Greek thought for centuries, and laid the groundwork for the development of philosophical theology in the West. He was pushing for a more consistent, more noble, and ultimately more true understanding of the divine. Now, Xenophanes didn't stop at purely negative critique. He also offered a powerful, positive, alternative conception of the divine that was as radical as his rejection of Homeric theology. At the center of this new theology is the figure of a supreme deity, described in the fragment. One God greatest among gods and men, not at all like mortals in body or in thought.
One God greatest. So maybe not strictly monotheistic.
Well, scholarly debate continues over whether this represents a strict monotheism or perhaps a form of henotheism, belief in one primary God without necessarily denying others. But the revolutionary emphasis is unequivocally on a singular ultimate principle that transcends the multiplicity and fallibility of the traditional pantheon.
And what's striking about this God is how it's defined by what it isn't, right? It's characterized by its radical otherness, its complete difference from mortal beings and their limitations.
Yeah.
Xenophanes systematically strips his God of all anthropomorphic and perspectival attributes.
He really does. It's a process of negation.
First, it's non-anthropomorphic and immobile.
Yeah.
The God is not at all like mortals in body and remains always in the same place, not moving at all. It's not a physical actor, not subject to change or passion, but a stable, unchanging principle that undergirds all existence.
Completely unlike the squabbling, traveling Olympians. Secondly, its perception is holistic and utterly non-perspectival. The God doesn't perceive the world through discrete sense organs like a mortal, with all their limitations and biases. Instead, it is all eye, all thought, all ear.
All at once, no viewpoint.
Its knowledge is total, simultaneous, and non-perspectival. It doesn't have a specific point of view on the world. Its consciousness encompasses the world in its entirety, without needing to process it through any filter. There's no particular angle or limited access for this God.
And finally, its power is effortless and purely intellectual. This supreme being doesn't act through physical exertion or labor. It shakes all things by the thought of his mind.
Just thinks it and it happens.
Its power is purely intellectual, controlling the cosmos through effortless intellection. a pure act of thought. This conception of a self-sufficient, remote, and non-intervening God has profound consequences. It led Xenophanes to demythologize natural phenomena. A rainbow, for instance, is not the goddess Iris, but nothing but a cloud.
Stripping away the myth, finding a natural cause.
He rejected divination, arguing that a god so fundamentally different from mortals would not communicate with them through ambiguous signs or omens. His god is not a conversational partner or a petty intervener, but the stable, rational ground of the cosmos itself.
Okay, so the entire philosophical project of Xenophanes is built upon a foundational epistemology that draws a sharp, and for him, unbridgeable distinction between divine knowledge and human belief. This epistemological framework is most clearly articulated in his famous fragment B34, which is truly a cornerstone of early Western skepticism.
B34, right? The one about truth.
He says, "And as for certain truth, to safes, no man has known it, nor will he know it, neither of the gods, nor of all the things of which I speak. For even if he should happen to speak the complete truth, that he himself does not know it. But belief, doxa, is fashioned over all things."
Wow. So no man has known it, nor will he know it. That's pretty definitive.
It really is. This passage establishes an absolute qualitative gap between the certain, clear, and complete knowledge, or to safes, that is the exclusive province of the divine, and the provisional, fallible world of human opinion, or seeming, which he calls doxa.
Doxa, opinion, belief, seeming.
Exactly. For Xenophanes, mortals are fundamentally limited in their capacity for true knowledge. We can inquire, we can investigate, and we can form beliefs that are more or less plausible, but we can never attain the absolute certainty that would allow us to say we truly know something with divine clarity.
Even if we stumble upon the truth by accident.
Even then, even if a human were to state the truth by sheer chance, they would still lack the epistemic justification, the genuine understanding to be certain of it. You wouldn't know you were right.
Right. You'd just be lucky.
This limitation, he argued, stems directly from the nature of human perception itself. Xenophanes recognized the subjective and conditioned nature of our sensory experience. His fragment, "If God had not made yellow honey, they would think that figs were far sweeter," demonstrates his acute awareness that our judgments are relative to our limited range of experience and our particular sensory apparatus.
Our perception is relative, depends on context.
Completely. Our senses don't provide direct, unmediated access to the objective nature of things. Instead, they're filtered through the veil of our own perceptions and our embodied existence. The mortal embodied perspective is therefore not a source of ontological truth, but fundamentally an epistemological limitation. It is the very thing that confines us to the realm of doxa, to the world of mere seeming.
So the body limits our knowledge.
For Xenophanes, yes. The proper human response to this condition, for him, is not to celebrate the multiplicity of opinions, not to say, oh, everyone's view is equally valid. No. It's to engage in rigorous rational inquiry, to seek explanations based on natural principles, and to strive for beliefs that are like the truth, all while maintaining a profound intellectual modesty about the limits of what we can truly know. So we've carefully laid out the conceptual frameworks of both Viveiros de Castro and Xenophanes. They're incredibly rich systems. Now, to truly stage this critical encounter, it's really helpful, I think, to briefly juxtapose their core tenets, almost like a conceptual cheat sheet for you, the listener, to see where their fundamental assumptions collide head-on.
Perfect. Let's do a quick compare and contrast. Let's start with what they see as universal. For Viveiros de Castro, the universal is the soul or spirit or culture, a shared, immanent human subjectivity that defines what it means to be a subject for anything.
Right, found everywhere, inherent in all things.
For Xenophanes, on the other hand, the universal is the one God, a singular, transcendent, non-anthropomorphic reality. Completely different kind of universal.
Already a profound difference. And their ideas on the particular are just as inverted. For Viveiros de Castro, the particular is the body, or nature, a multiplicity of different bodies creating many truly real and distinct natures, or worlds.
Difference is physical, generating different realities.
But for Xenophanes, the particular is what humans do. It's human cultures and human species, each merely projecting its own fallible, limited image onto a singular reality. The differences are just errors in perception or belief.
So human difference is error, not reality.
Yeah.
And their core critiques also differ fundamentally. Viveiros de Castro critiques Western mononaturalism and that deeply entrenched nature-culture binary that shapes our thought.
He wants to break down our categories.
Xenophanes, conversely, critiques anthropomorphic projection, the act of making the divine or ultimate reality in our own image, and the relativism of human belief.
He wants to get beyond human limitations entirely, and their epistemological goals are equally divergent. Viveiros de Castro aims to take other ontologies seriously and to decolonize thought by embracing ontological plurality. Find value in the difference.
Xenophanes, on the other hand, strives to move beyond subjective opinion and cultural relativity toward a rational conception of a singular, non-perspectival divine truth. Overcome the difference to find the one truth.
Exactly. And the role of the body is perhaps the most stark contrast, truly an irreconcilable difference. For Viveiros de Castro, the body is the producer of a real ontological perspective and world. It literally creates reality.
The body makes truth.
For Xenophanes, the body is a source of limitation and subjective, fallible perspective, a prism of sorts, confining us to doxa, to mere seeming.
The body obscures truth. These inversions set the stage perfectly for our direct confrontation and the core question of whether Viveiros de Castro truly escapes anthropomorphism. Okay, before we dive into the deep chasm that separates these two thinkers, it's important to acknowledge one rare but significant point of agreement, a shared starting point for their critical projects. Both Xenophanes and Viveiros de Castro initiate their endeavors with a powerful critique of ethnocentrism.
Yeah, that's that thread we mentioned earlier.
That fundamental error of taking one's own contingent condition, one's own way of being, as the universal and unquestioned standard by which to judge everyone and everything else.
That's a perceptive point. Xenophanes, in his observations of the Thracians and Ethiopians, identifies the parochial tendency of each group to fashion gods quite literally in their own physical image. This powerfully reveals the culturally specific, rather than universally valid, nature of their beliefs about the divine.
It's proof that it's local, not universal.
It's an early, incisive form of cultural critique, demonstrating that what appears natural or universal is often just local and conventional.
And centuries later, Viveiros de Castro highlights a very similar dynamic in the context of the colonial encounter. He recounts the famous, almost darkly humorous anecdote of the Spanish conquistadors debating in theological councils whether Amerindians possessed souls, which was, of course, the definitive marker of European humanity.
Right, the big debate. Are they human like us?
Simultaneously, on the other side of the Atlantic, Amerindians were conducting their own scientific experiments, rather pragmatically drowning captured Europeans to see if their bodies would putrefy in the typical way, thereby testing whether they possessed bodies like their own, which was their primary marker of humanity.
Checking if they were human like them. It's perfectly symmetrical.
Exactly. In both these powerful examples, the critique targets the naive assumption that one's own primary marker of being, whether the European soul or the Amerindian body, is the definitive universal criterion for all.
This shared critical intent to expose and dismantle a pervasive form of ethnocentric projection provides the initial, albeit thin, thread of connection between the ancient rhapsode and the contemporary anthropologist. However, it is from this precise shared starting point that their paths diverge into fundamentally irreconcilable opposition.
The agreement stops right there.
Pretty much. Okay, here's where Xenophanes, were he here, would likely land his most powerful punch on Viveiros de Castro's theory. He would argue that for all its talk of being anti-anthropocentric, Viveiros de Castro's perspectivism actually commits the ultimate act of anthropomorphism.
The ultimate act. How so?
It achieves this not by making gods look like humans physically, but by universalizing the very form of human subjectivity as the metaphysical ground of all being. Xenophanes' radical move was to seek an escape from the human form entirely. Viveiros de Castro is to make that human form the inescapable constant of the cosmos.
So help me understand this better. If Viveiros de Castro is explicitly trying to be anti-anthropocentric, how can Xenophanes turn around and call it the ultimate anthropomorphism? What's the subtle trick being played here, according to Xenophanes?
It comes down to the nature of the projection itself. Xenophanes' objection to anthropomorphism isn't merely about its specific cultural content, like gods having snub noses or red hair. His critique targets the form of anthropomorphism itself, the projection of the fundamental attributes of mortal existence, like being born, having a specific kind of body, a voice, and clothes.
Projecting mortality itself.
Exactly. His entire goal is to conceive of a reality that is qualitatively different from the mortal condition. His one God is defined precisely by what it is not. It is not at all like mortals in body or in thought. It is unmoving, non-corporeal, and possesses a holistic, non-perspectival consciousness. This god represents a truly radical break from the human, a move towards genuine alterity, something truly other.
Okay, so Xenophanes wants something totally non-human, and Viveiros de Castro's system, by contrast, seems to perform the opposite operation.
Precisely. Viveiros de Castro's system posits a generic human condition, or a universal soul, as the common element shared by all species and entities. This soul is presented as the universal locus of subjectivity, the reflexive eye that allows any being to see itself as a human from its own point of view.
The universal eye.
Therefore, from a xenophantic standpoint, perspectivism doesn't escape anthropomorphism, it actually absolutizes it. It takes the category of the human subject, this internal reflective awareness that we understand, and projects it onto the entire cosmos, making it the universal substance. Every being, from a jaguar to a peccary, is fundamentally a human concealed within a different corporeal skin, a different body.
So in essence, perspectivism's celebrated anti-anthropocentrism appears as a kind of conceptual sleight of hand. It successfully decenters the biological species Homo sapiens from its privileged position, that's true, but it does so only by simultaneously recentering the philosophical form of human subjectivity as the organizing principle of all reality.
That's the xenophantic critique in a nutshell.
The system, then, seems to lack a genuine concept of the non-human or the other, in the truly radical sense that Xenophanes sought. In perspectivism, the other is always at its core another version of the self, another human in a different body.
Always relatable back to the human subjective form.
Xenophanes' entire project was aimed at rejecting this very move, at purging thought of the conceit that the ultimate nature of reality must bear the indelible imprint of our own subjective form. He would likely see in multinaturalism not a decolonization of thought, but its most subtle and complete colonization by the human image. It's like changing the costumes and scenery, but keeping the same lead actor for every single role in the cosmic play.
A powerful critique, whether you agree with it or not. Okay, the second major line of xenophantic critique targets the very conclusion that Viveiros de Castro draws from the evidence of perspectival difference. For Viveiros de Castro, the fact that different beings perceive different worlds is proof of a profound ontological pluralism, that there are genuinely multiple realities.
Right, different bodies, different worlds, multiple truths.
For Xenophanes, the exact same data would be proof, instead of a universal epistemological limitation, reinforcing the absolute need for a single unifying truth that transcends all partial perspectives.
So, same evidence, opposite conclusion.
Completely opposite. From Xenophanes' viewpoint, multinaturalism, for all its sophistication, is simply a reified and unreformed form of the relativism that he tirelessly sought to overcome.
And the parallel in their reasoning, once you lay it out, is striking. Xenophanes observes that Thracians and Ethiopians have different culturally specific beliefs about the gods. His conclusion is not that there are multiple, equally valid divine worlds, a Thracian reality and an Ethiopian reality. No.
That would be absurd to him.
Rather, he concludes that because these beliefs are relative and contradictory, they are all likely false projections, mere forms of human opinion, or doxa, that fundamentally fail to grasp the one true nature of the divine. The evidence of difference, for him, points directly toward a singular transcendent truth that lies beyond these fallible perspectives.
Viveiros de Castro, in a structurally identical argumentative move, observes that different species have different perspectives. A human sees blood, where a jaguar sees manioc beer. His conclusion, however, is the exact opposite of Xenophanes. He argues that these different perspectives actually constitute multiple, equally valid natures or worlds. He takes the evidence of perspectival difference as the final word, the ultimate proof, effectively reifying it as an ontological plurality.
So if we apply Xenophanes' critical logic here, a xenophantic reading would say that the fact that a jaguar's world is different from a human's world does not prove the existence of two separate natures.
No, it proves something else entirely.
Instead, it proves the inherent limitations of their respective bodily apparatuses. It demonstrates that neither the jaguar nor the human has unmediated certain access to certain truth, to sais, which must by definition be singular and non-perspectival, the one God that is all thought and perceives holistically without bias.
The multiplicity of perspectives, for Xenophanes, is simply evidence of a universal confinement to the realm of doxa, to mere appearance. It shows everyone is limited, not that everyone has their own truth.
Therefore, Viveiros de Castro's multinaturalism, seen through Xenophanes' austere lens, appears as an unreformed relativism. It takes what Xenophanes diagnosed as a symptom of epistemological limitation, the unavoidable relativity of human belief and perception, and elevates it to the status of a fundamental ontological principle.
It mistakes the symptom for the reality.
It celebrates the prison of perspective, treating each cell as if it were its own sovereign world, rather than acknowledging the existence of a single true reality that lies beyond those prison walls, a reality that can only be glimpsed through the disciplined and modest exercise of reason.
And this resonates, as you alluded to, with critiques from within anthropology itself that worry about the political implications of reifying difference in a way that could, ironically, echo the logic of segregationist ideologies, where each group is sealed within its own unknowable world.
Right, the danger of making worlds too separate.
For Xenophanes, the goal of philosophy is precisely to move beyond the celebration of difference in opinion toward a rational conception of a unified, common reality that transcends all particular viewpoints.
Okay, the final and perhaps most irreconcilable point of conflict between these two profound systems lies in their diametrically opposed valuation of the body. This opposition fundamentally reveals the chasm between a metaphysics of immanence and becoming and one of transcendence and being.
Yeah, this is where they really can't meet.
Viveiros de Castro's system embraces a metaphysics of immanence, meaning reality is found within the world and its constant unfolding, its becoming. Xenophanes, on the other hand, leans towards transcendence, a reality that exists beyond our immediate physical experience, unchanging and perfect.
In Viveiros de Castro's perspectivism, the body is not merely a component, it is the locus of difference and the absolute source of nature. The world, in this view, is nothing other than the effect of a specific point of view that emerges directly from a particular corporeal arrangement.
The body generates the viewpoint, which is the world.
Exactly. A body's specific capacities, what it can do, what it consumes, how it moves, determine its percepts, and these percepts, in turn, constitute its reality. The body, in this sense, makes truth. It is the very machine that generates an ontology. This is a philosophy of radical immanence where reality is entirely coextensive with the dynamic web of relations enacted by different bodies.
So truth isn't out there, it's made in here by the body.
There is no truth or reality outside of or prior to these embodied perspectives. Truth is always generated from within, through the body's interaction with its world.
Now contrast that with Xenophanes' thought. For him, the mortal body with its limited and specific sense organs is precisely what condemns us to the world of seeming and opinion, doxa. Our perceptions are subjective, relative, and inherently untrustworthy.
Like the honey and figs example.
As his example of tasting figs after honey perfectly demonstrates how our senses can deceive us or alter our perceptions, true knowledge, true reality, belongs exclusively to the one God, who is defined by its very lack of a mortal perspectival body.
True knowledge is disembodied for him.
The goal of rational inquiry, then, is to overcome the limitations imposed by our corporeal existence, to use the mind to approach a truth that the senses can never grasp. For Xenophanes, the body is an obstacle, a barrier to truth, a source of confusion.
The opposite of a truth maker.
This is a philosophy of transcendence, one that devalues the fleeting, mutable, corporeal world of becoming in favor of an eternal, unchanging, and non-bodily reality. This philosophical move is a clear precursor to the Platonic dualism that would come to dominate much of Western thought, where the body is often seen as a tomb from which the soul must seek escape to contemplate pure forms.
So from a Xenophantic perspective, then, Viveiros de Castro's entire system is founded upon a monumental category error. It takes the very instrument of our epistemological confinement, the perspectival body, and fundamentally mistakes it for the source of ontological reality.
It mistakes the prison bars for the building blocks of the world.
Exactly. It glorifies the prison of perspective, treating each individual cell as its own sovereign world, rather than acknowledging the existence of a single, true reality that lies beyond those prison walls, a reality which can only be glimpsed through the disciplined and humble exercise of reason. For Xenophanes, this means celebrating precisely what holds us back from genuine understanding.
So our critical dialogue between the ancient rhapsode and the contemporary anthropologist culminates in a pointed and frankly unsettling question for the ontological turn itself. When viewed through the clarifying, if severe, lens of Xenophanes' relentless critique of projection, the foundational concept of Viveiros de Castro's system, that universal human soul or subjectivity, is revealed as a potential unexamined fiction.
A fiction hiding in plain sight.
The Xenophantic critique forces us to ask, has the ambitious project of a permanent decolonization of thought failed to decolonize its own most central category? In its powerful effort to dismantle the Western nature-culture binary, has it inadvertently taken a core component of Western humanism, the notion of the reflexive interior subject, and simply projected it onto the entire cosmos, making it the metaphysical constant of all being.
This question strikes at the very heart of Viveiros de Castro's project. His work brilliantly demonstrates that what Westerners categorize as culture is, for Amerindians, the universal, and what we call nature is their particular. That inversion is powerful.
Undeniably.
But the Xenophantic challenge suggests that the very form of this universal, a soul or spirit that functions as a center of self-aware perspective, an I, is itself a projection, a familiar human construct. Xenophanes would argue that to posit that a jaguar sees itself as a human is to commit the same fundamental error as the Thracians who saw their gods as Thracians.
It's just projecting our model of subjectivity instead of our physical form.
It is to take a familiar local model of being, the human subject, and universalize it across the entire cosmos. This concern isn't merely an external philosophical imposition. It resonates with internal critiques from within anthropology that question the universal applicability of the perspectivist model even across the diverse cosmologies of Amazonia, suggesting it risks becoming a new, albeit subtle, homogenizing formula.
Implying one size fits all, even within indigenous thought.
The ultimate challenge, then, is whether the ontological turn has truly escaped the gravitational pull of its own conceptual heritage, or has simply inverted its terms while leaving the anthropomorphic core intact. Hashtag tag 4.2, the politics of a perspectiveless truth versus ontological pluralism.
Now, the profound philosophical opposition between these two systems translates directly into starkly different political possibilities and potential risks. Viveiros de Castro's ontological pluralism is an explicitly political endeavor aimed at fostering the ontological self-determination of the world's peoples.
That's its stated goal, yes.
By insisting on the reality of other worlds, it seeks to validate indigenous thought and actively resist the epistemic violence of colonialism, which has historically reduced other ontologies to mere beliefs to be corrected or assimilated by Western science. This, without a doubt, is its undeniable ethical and political force.
Absolutely. It offers a powerful tool for resisting cognitive imperialism. However, this position is not without its own political perils. Critics have pointed out that a radical insistence on incommensurable self-contained worlds can inadvertently echo the logic of segregationist ideologies like apartheid.
Oh, that's a serious charge.
Which also posited that different cultures were so essentially distinct that they must be kept separate. Furthermore, the project faces the enormous challenge of translating its radical philosophical claims into concrete political practice without being domesticated or defanged by the very Western conceptual frameworks it seeks to oppose.
How do you make it work politically without watering it down?
This raises an important question for all of us. Can difference truly be affirmed and celebrated without leading to intellectual or even social isolation?
And this brings us to Xenophanes' radical move toward a universal, non-perspectival truth. While seemingly absolutist and, at first glance, perhaps even apolitical, his position contains its own distinct form of radical political potential.
Which might seem counterintuitive.
By arguing that all human perspectives and cultural projections are ultimately fallible opinions, or doxa, when measured against a higher singular truth, his philosophy provides a powerful standpoint for external critique. It creates a universal ground from which one can judge the practices and values of any given culture, including one's own.
A standard outside the system.
Xenophanes himself did this, using his rationalist principles to condemn not only the immoral tales of the poets, but also his own society's misplaced values, such as the veneration of athletes over wisdom and virtue.
He wasn't afraid to criticize his own culture based on this higher standard.
This raises a crucial question for contemporary thought. Could a seemingly absolutist position, by providing a universal standard of reason and moral perfection, offer a more robust foundation for a universal ethics and a critique of injustice than a system of ontologically separate and potentially incommensurable worlds?
Does celebrating difference undermine the possibility of universal critique?
Xenophanes' philosophy suggests that true critique, the kind that can genuinely challenge power structures or ingrained cultural biases, requires a standpoint outside the system being critiqued, a universal vantage point that perspectivism, by its very nature, may be unable to provide.
It demands a universal ground to stand on to effectively challenge the local and the particular. Perspectivism might struggle to provide that. This inquiry began with the proposition that Xenophanes, an ancient Greek rhapsode, could be productively brought into contact with Viveiros de Castro's contemporary project. Our analysis confirms this hypothesis in the strongest terms. The dialogue with Xenophanes is not merely productive, it is in fact essential, for it exposes with unparalleled clarity the deep-seated metaphysical assumptions at the very heart of the ontological turn.
He acts like a philosophical stress test.
Exactly. The ancient philosopher's relentless critique of projection acts as a powerful solvent, forcing a rigorous re-examination of what it truly means to be anti-anthropocentric and to genuinely decolonize thought.
And the Xenophantic critique forces contemporary anthropology, and indeed all of us who seek to understand diverse ways of being, to confront a fundamental choice that the ontological turn in its celebration of plurality may have inadvertently obscured. Is the ultimate goal of a critical anthropology to multiply perspectives, to celebrate the endless proliferation of worlds?
Or,
Or is its mission to engage in the difficult, rational work of seeking a common truth about the single world we all, in our different ways, inhabit, even if that truth is elusive and maybe even unattainable?
in the final analysis, Xenophanes' challenge remains more radical than it first appears. By pushing thought toward a reality not at all like mortals, he presents a more profound and unsettling challenge to anthropocentrism than a system that, however ingeniously, ends up finding the human form everywhere it looks, however inverted that humanity may be.
Even if it calls itself anti-anthropocentric.
The enduring legacy of the rhapsode is his unwavering demand that we attempt to think what is truly other, a thought not of our own making, a reality not in our own image. This task, this purification of thought from its own inherent projections, remains a central and perhaps unattainable goal for any anthropology or any philosophy that claims to be not only a science of humanity, but a genuinely profound philosophical endeavor.
What an incredible journey through 2.5 millennia of thought. We've seen how Eduardo Viveiros de Castro proposes a radical inversion of Western thought, where all beings share a universal human subjectivity across multiple natures. And then we've sharply contrasted that with Xenophanes' relentless pursuit of a singular non-human transcendent divine truth, a truth meant to free thought from all anthropomorphic projections, especially our own.
So the question lingers. If our deepest, most sincere attempts to decolonize thought and step outside ourselves still reveal the indelible imprint of the human, what does that truly tell us about the very limits of human understanding? And how far can we genuinely step outside our own skins?
A truly thought-provoking question to leave you with. Thank you for joining us on AI History of Western Philosophy. We encourage you to consider these profound questions further, long after our conversation ends.